Left-wing extremists are more likely to destroy your property. Right-wing extremists are more likely to hurt you physically.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's interesting. You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture.
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I sat down and discussed a head injury that I suffered this week. And then later on in the pod, we sat down with Jennifer Butler and Napp Nazworth and talk about an upcoming conference titled Politics, Polarization, and Peacemaking. It's going to be a good pod, so stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
I'm a lot better now that you're not bleeding everywhere.
Okay, so you're going to have to tell the story behind why you said that.
Of course. So you've been a little accident prone lately.
Indeed, I have.
To the point where my friends are asking if I've, updated your life insurance, and of course I have, right?
Of course, absolutely.
So last week on July the 4th, a week and a half ago, I guess now, you had a little incident at our Reno project house.
I did.
Where you fell through the floor.
Literally fell through the floor.
Right. And hit your head, got
a
really nasty goose egg, and we're pretty shaken up for a bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, who wouldn't be if you were walking through your house and fall through the floor?
Sure. Well, that's what you get for trying to work on the 4th of July, man.
Very true. That's so un-American of me.
Right. And so then today, as of our recording, you kind of got in a fight with the car door, and the car door won.
Yeah,
and we were actually getting in the car to head to the airport to catch a flight.
Yep.
No big surprise there. And you were trying to avoid standing in the mud, so you were on the driveway.
I was trying to be responsible.
Right. The whole thing. Open the car door. It hit you in the...
I literally hit myself in the head.
You did.
And I go down.
Immediately fall.
Take a knee.
We fell prostrate, right?
I wouldn't say fell. I took a knee.
You took a knee. Okay, which was wonderful because you have a white shirt on, right?
I do.
You got no blood on your white shirt. Anyways, so blood's gushing everywhere. We have to catch a flight. We actually are, in Norman, Oklahoma, but for this flight today, we're driving down to Dallas to catch a flight because it was much, much less expensive. Anyways, so you proceeded to bleed all the way to the airport. We stopped at the CVS, got in Dallas.
Bad.
Here's the thing, though. We stopped because I was genuinely afraid they would not let you on the plane if you were actively bleeding. So.
I mean, it was so bad. I hit my head. I take a knee in our front yard. I mean, blood is literally dripping out of my head onto our front yard. We get it all cleaned up. I get into the car. We head down to Dallas. And let's just be honest, I'm leaky.
Leaky. Okay, that's a good word for it.
So we did some triage on the way down.
Yes. If you're not aware, CVS has a whole section of products that are geared towards stopping bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ran in and picked up everything they had, and we tried anyways. So you're good now.
I am.
And we have arrived safely at our destination, and our apologies if you can hear the party happening in the hotel parking lot outside. But there's
lots going on out there. I don't know
not
what
a whole
it is.
lot we can do about
Right.
that. So it's been a little bit of an exciting day, if I should say.
It has been an exciting day.
So anyways.
Yeah. Well, speaking of triage, Missy, I don't know if you've seen the news lately, but our home state of Oklahoma has made national headlines again.
So I heard one little snippet. I know couple of weeks ago, as of our, I guess we were gone last week for the 4th, but the week before that, just after we recorded, the whole debacle happened with Ryan Walters saying that we were going to teach the Bible in school. And I immediately, as the parent of 2 preachers' kids, thought back to all the Bible stories that they would choose to teach in school
not be
and
free.
wanted to say, yo, Ryan, this may not be a good idea.
Right.
But the Twitterverse has taken up this mantle and has been great about posting all of the Bible stories that they would teach in school. So not a good idea, but something's happened since then.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, so we've been off a week, and since the last recording and the last episode, lots have happened here in Oklahoma. One, that there was some good news in that the Oklahoma Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Attorney General here in Oklahoma, siding with him that actually funding a private religious school with public money was against the state and federal constitution. So, hats off to the Oklahoma Supreme Court.
You don't get to say that very often.
You do not. You do not. And then within 24 hours, our superintendent, Ryan Walters in Oklahoma, decides that, hey, I think it'd be a good idea to teach Bible in public schools, and makes it a requirement for it to be taught in public schools. So that's what you're talking about. But then, if that's not enough, Missy, this very week, Walters says, you know what? Teaching the Bible's not enough. I'm going to go after social studies, and basically, I'm going to employ the most outrageous, extremist organization I can to rewrite social studies curriculum in the state of Oklahoma. So guess who he has asked to serve on a committee to help rewrite social studies for all students in the state of Oklahoma?
If it wasn't so late at night and I wasn't so tired, I could probably come up with some really creative answers for you. Well, I don't know.
Well, believe it or not, he has handpicked 2 people. One is Kevin Roberts, who is the head of the Heritage Foundation, which led Project 2025, whom we're going to
talk more about that.
Talk much more about that in future episodes. But he's on the committee. And then Dennis Prager, who is the founder of PragerU, who has produced these little snippet cartoons that has whitewashed history to the extreme, basically saying, you know what? All of the Puritans who came over in England did the Native Americans a favor when they landed.
We did, right? Are you sitting here as like proof of that?
Absolutely, 100%. And then also, slavery wasn't that bad. They were being taught, labor skills.
Here's the thing. I hear these things and I think, oh, you're exaggerating.
Yeah.
They don't really put these things
really
out. But I have watched some of these videos from PragerU, and it is very scary. I know last year when our state superintendent, I'm just not going to say his name.
Okay.
But when our state superintendent said basically the schools can use these
videos, he gave permission for districts to use PragerU materials.
And probably much to his surprise, the school district said, no thanks.
Oh, they stiff-armed him really hard.
So now what I hear you saying is he's saying we're just going to allow these individuals to rewrite our curriculum, and therefore it will be state standards.
Yep.
Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
That is truly terrifying.
It's horrifying. I mean, they are about to erase history in the state of Oklahoma. And let's just be honest about this. This isn't the first time it's happened. I mean, I am a product of Oklahoma Public Schools, and I have spoken on this podcast before. I've written about this very topic at goodfaithmedia.org. The fact that I lived several miles from Greenwood and Black Wall Street and had never heard the story of the Tulsa Race Massacre. It was obliterated from our Oklahoma history textbooks. Did not know it happened. If I did hear about it, it may have been a sentence, at the most a paragraph. Now, all of this history, this honest, truthful history that we have experienced as a country, the good and the bad, but primarily the bad, is going to be entirely erased from the curriculum.
It's really terrifying, which leads us into kind of conversations we need to have ongoing about Project 2025.
Absolutely.
And, we talk about Oklahoma, obviously that's where we live. So that's kind of just the water we swim in. But this spreads wider. I was reading on Twitter. I've tried not to get on Twitter anymore these days because it just takes me down to the pit of despair.
Right.
But Jess Piper, who we've had on the show before, she tweeted out today, I live in Missouri. We've been running the pilot project for 2025 for years. Trust me when I tell you, you don't want this. And I thought, we're in Oklahoma. Same girl, same.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about these things that are happening in states like ours, like Missouri and Oklahoma, in effect, to let people know, to sound the alarm. This is happening.
Yeah.
These things, when you've got PragerU writing curriculum, not just telling teachers, oh, you can use these videos. Thankfully, our teachers are still smart enough to say, we got a problem with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you mandate it as curriculum, that is what the teachers have to teach. And that's terrifying. But that is part of this whole ethos of thinking, this whole ideology behind folks who are promoting Project 2025. It's terrifying.
It is terrifying. I'm so glad you brought up Jess Piper, because you bring up a very interesting point from the standpoint that I think about all of those citizens in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, states that are very, mixed in their politics, in their faith, and what we would call swing states in this country. I am telling you, if you want to support the MAGA movement, this is what you're looking at. This is the kind of agenda that is trying to take over the federal government. So look at states like Oklahoma and Missouri and Arkansas and Texas. That is their goal, is to make the entire country follow those state mandates. And it is terrifying, and we live in one of those states, and I beg people, please do not fall for it.
Well, and talk to people, expand your circle to those who are directly affected by the policies that have been enacted, by the teachers who are so just stifled and who can no longer teach and no longer feel like they're educating students as they need to be, no longer have libraries in their classrooms, for goodness sake.
Right.
These are our friends. These are people we know. These are people we text regularly,
Exactly.
who are saying, I'm terrified.
Yeah.
And we're putting our children in their care, and they can't even do what they feel is right, what they're trained to do and teach our children. And it's really scary.
It is scary. And speaking of scary, I mean, there are a lot of us in this camp right now who are terrified for the Christian faith, for faith at large, and particularly for democracy in this country. And you and I had the privilege of sitting down with Jennifer Butler and Napp Nazworth this week. They've got a conference that they're putting together in Atlanta, Georgia, titled Politics, Polarization, and Peacemaking. It sounds like a very interesting conference. We talk about some of the themes that they're going to be discussing at that conference later on in the month. And so I am glad that there are individuals and organizations like theirs that are working on these issues to help people understand what we're facing as a people of faith and as a democracy.
I agree. I love people who are fighting the good fight, and I also love a good alliterative title for anything. So it makes me happy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So stay tuned. Missy and I sit down with Jennifer Butler and Napp Nazworth after this break. Hey friends, it's Mitch Randall, CEO of Good Faith Media. We've been hard at work producing a new podcast for our friends over at Free Mom Hugs.
Well, Mitch, disclaimer.
Yeah?
You and Cliff have been hard at work. I'm mostly just here for color commentary. Let's just be honest about that.
Very, very true.
But for those who may not know, the nonprofit Free Mom Hugs, founded by Sarah Cunningham, empowers the world to celebrate the LGBTQIA+ community through visibility, education, and conversation.
And perhaps you've heard about their work. They do indeed offer free hugs and high fives. They stand in at weddings, all of it helping people who have experienced rejection for being who they are.
Their new podcast is titled Pride 365, Keeping Queer Kids Alive. A new episode will drop each Wednesday during the month of June, which is Pride Month.
But Pride 365 is about more than a month. It's about a movement and the moms keeping queer kids alive.
The first episode drops June 5th, and it's hosted by Free Mom Hug's very own saints, Sarah Cunningham and Katrina Cobb.
Pride 365, Keeping Queer Kids Alive, a new podcast produced by Good Faith Media for Free Mom Hugs.
Learn more at freemomhugs.org and goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got two very special guests with us. Jennifer Butler has spent the last 3 decades strengthening and rebuilding the progressive faith movement. She has dedicated her life to helping individuals and communities ground themselves in liberated spirituality that empowers them to speak out with a faithful voice to change the world. In 2005, Butler founded Faith in Public Life to amplify progressive faith voices and forge multiracial, multi-faith, and ideological diverse faith coalitions to work for justice and the common good. Today, Butler is a consultant, writer, and speaker on religion, public policy, and democracy. Napp Nazworth is the executive director of American Values Coalition. He previously worked in academia for 6 years, teaching courses in U.S. government, Congress, and religion and politics. For 8.5 years, he was a journalist, opinion editor, and politics editor for the Christian Post. Butler and Nazworth are organizing the Politics, Polarization, and Peacemaking Pastors Conference in Atlanta, Georgia on July 25th. Jennifer, Napp, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thanks so much for having us.
So, Napp, I want to start with the obvious question. Aside from the fact that the alliteration of the conference title is on point, amazing, big fan, just what we're all thinking, why do we need a conference on politics, polarization, and peacemaking for pastors?
I mean, everything's so calm today, right?
So tell us, why the need, and what are some themes that you're going to address?
For sure. I mean, I think we're all kind of feeling it this year, especially as we get closer to the election, and everything we went through in the previous election, and so many of us in our families, in our personal relationships, in our churches, have seen these relationships torn apart through politics, because a lot of it because of the extremism and the misinformation that's coming from the right wing these days. And whenever problems happen in society, oftentimes those problems end up on the front doors of pastors. So pastors have been on the front lines of dealing with this, just in their personal relationships, in their own families oftentimes, but also especially in their churches. We've heard so many stories of pastors dealing with churches that are splitting or breaking apart, or people leaving, and all sorts of problems that they've experienced just in the past few years.
So Napp, I want to talk about some of the themes associated within the conference here in just a second. But Jennifer, I want to go to you next. The need for a conference like this, in particular addressing the needs of clergy. We have heard over the last several years the heartbreak that's coming from the church, especially our clerics who are struggling in their environments right now. And so you have been watching and analyzing faith and politics for quite some time now. And I know you know the history of the rise of the religious right, dating back to white supremacy, Jim Crow, all the way through the moral majority. But something happened in 2016 that seems to be a marker in this era that we're in, and that was the election of Donald J. Trump. Now, we all know the history, as I said a moment ago, but the Trump election unleashed something like we've never experienced before. And we're seeing, as Napp just alluded to, this wide and broad just chaos happening within the church and in the country. So can you talk a little bit about that? What did this guy unleash?
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, and let me say this too. I would say prior to 2016, Faith in Public Life had been building relationships across ideological divides from 2005 until 2015. And we were pretty convinced that we could get to a place in this country where we had a coalition of, conservatives and liberals and moderates that could work together in really pragmatic ways on issues that mattered, like immigration reform and, healthcare reform. And we pretty much did, but then there was something bubbling beneath the surface. And I think part of what was going on was the right wing had been organizing for decades. We had the election of our first Black president. There was the use of Islamophobia in the wake of 9/11, which was also kind of a race baiting technique, appealing to all kinds of racial grievances, not just Islamophobia. We had, a president who had a middle name, Barack Hussein Obama. And so, this pretty much tracks with my personal life. I served in part of the Obama administration, and I actually had one of my relatives call me and say she feared for me because she had heard that President Obama was working with ISIS.
Mhm.
And so that kind of fomentation was happening underneath. And being from Atlanta, being from the South, I often heard a lot about that, and you wouldn't hear about it in public, but you could find things that were happening on the internet and in certain news media channels. So that was fomenting. Trump gets elected in 2016, and he kind of unleashes the beast in a way. He signals and nods to right-wing and racist leaders and networks and militia groups. And he gives them the high sign that this is okay. And so I think that emboldens the hard right and starts to reshape and polarize our politics even more than it already was. So there's a combination of things, I guess, is what I'm saying, of long-term organizing by the right wing that built an infrastructure for this and really played off people's fears. And then the election of a populist leader who really kind of took the lid off the box.
Right.
And so, while I think a lot of people thought once Trump was defeated, things would change, things would kind of calm down. A lot of us said Trumpism is here to stay for a while. That's what needs to be defeated at this point, because we've got to deal with our deepest historical sins as a nation. We've got to go back and address those. And to do that, we're going to have to work together, again, across broad ideological divides and not let ourselves get divided by these fear-mongering tactics around race and gender and other issues.
Yeah, well said. And so, Napp, returning to the conference, I know you got several goals in association with this conference in North Atlanta coming up in a few weeks. I know also one of the goals of AVC is to maintain a bipartisan position, which I fully applaud. How are you going to address some of these issues, and how are you going to talk to the clergy when they are bearing the brunt of this? And what kind of outcome are you looking forward to, or you're looking to, out of this conference?
I wouldn't describe us as bipartisan. I
Okay.
would describe us as nonpartisan.
Okay, there you go.
And the way that I put it is we are political. We are very political. We are going to talk politics, and it's a big issue. We think politics is important. Political issues are important. We aren't going to avoid talking about politics, but we're not partisan. We are not here to use the gospel for partisan purposes or use Jesus to defend one particular party over others. Just a gross violation, I think, of the gospel, how people are using the gospel and Jesus to say, if you're a true Christian, you have to support this one political party. So that is not what we're up to. We are not partisan, but we are going to deal with political issues.
So what are some of the goals that you hope clergy come out of this conference with? We obviously want them attend to get the meat of the message, but just real quickly, maybe one or two goals that you're hoping clergy will take from this conference.
Yeah, I hope they'll get sort of a grounding and a hunger and a thirst for better understanding how to guide the political discipleship of their congregants. I think often in case you often have two sort of extremes, and both of them are wrong. And one is the one I just talked about, where you're using the church and the pulpit for partisan purposes. We don't want that. But then the other extreme is to because politics is so divisive that we're just going to avoid it altogether and avoid these issues and avoid talking about politics. And that's just going to be a no-go in our church and in our small groups. And that's a problem as well, because once you do that, once you make your church, your congregation a no politics zone, then your congregates will get their political discipleship from somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And that somewhere else is often the extremist groups who are targeting them with information through social media, through Christian radio, through talk radio, and all these other sources. And they're leading and they're getting their political discipleship from there. And that's where they become these sort of partisan, Christians who only see, their faith through the lens of one political party.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, you mentioned a little bit, or when Mitch's first question about 2016 and kind of what happened, and you talked about, folks being emboldened. And I want to maybe have a little bit of a conversation about the idea that the extremes on the right and the left are equally harmful to our democracy. And talk about, at what point does your conviction of conscience step over into extremism, and kind of where centrists or moderates fall? Just talk to us a little bit about that, a little bit about the argument. People will say, oh, well, there's extremism on both sides.
Yeah.
Is there a flaw in that statement, and how can we address it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So the question of, extremes and who's being more extreme, and when do we know we've gone too far to one side? The way I look at this is, throughout history, the political right and the political left have both been capable of going to extremes, meaning capable of committing violence, going so far in their political ideology that they deny the humanity of the other group of people. At this moment in history, it is the right that is mostly going to the extreme, spreading disinformation, saying, this presidential candidate right now, Donald Trump, wants to be a dictator from day one. And so we can look at the right and say, okay, the right now is being extreme. Now, even within this context, I would say the left has some moments where it can also go to the extreme and deny the humanity of others. I think some aspects of cancel culture, for example, go too far. And so how do we understand, what's in, what's out? When do we say we're going too far to the extreme? I think what's important is to be sure that we are affirming the dignity of all people. We're never demonizing them as being, literally of the devil, which some of the right-wing groups have done, or, trying to demonize them such that, they're not allowed to be a part of the conversation, or threatening them even with their lives, so which we saw at the Capitol insurrection. So what we see in our country right now is the political discourse is going so far to the extreme that people, when they weigh in with a perspective, are being run out of jobs, run out of institutions, their families are being threatened, they're being doxxed online, and that is not the kind of political culture that can sustain a democracy.
Yeah, to clarify, as far as the conference, we will be focused on right-wing extremism. This isn't to say that there's not a such thing as left-wing extremism. There is, but the focus of the conference is going to be on right-wing extremism. And so what our first speaker actually is Elizabeth Newman, who worked on domestic counterterrorism during the Trump administration. And she's done 2 of our conferences before, but one of the things she shows the pastors there at these conferences, she shows the data. Left-wing extremists are more likely to destroy your property. Right-wing extremists are more likely to hurt you physically.
Wow, that's interesting.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna go off script a minute. Tell me a little bit. Can you expand on that a little bit? That's an interesting statement. I have not heard that before.
Yeah, the political violence is more likely to come from right-wing extremist groups today than left-wing extremist groups, and that's something that's for the people who come to our conferences. That piece of data can be a little bit shocking, especially if most of your news sources are from the right. If most of your news, if you're mostly getting your news from Fox News, that would be shocking, because it's not something that's covered on Fox News, right? So and I come at this as somebody who's a political and theological conservative, a pre-Trump Republican, but at these conferences, I say, this is a mess that's on our side of the political spectrum. If you're on the right, this is a clean our own house situation. There's something really dangerous and wrong going on the right side of American politics. And it really needs to be conservatives who are speaking up and denouncing this stuff that's happening.
Yeah.
I attended a similar conference in Arizona, and as one who is more from the progressive end of the political spectrum, I was in awe. There were 100 clergy there, most of them from independent evangelical churches.
Mm-hmm.
And the first speaker we heard was Elizabeth Newman, who worked for the Department of Homeland Security under Bush and shortly for a short time under Trump, and had to quit because they wouldn't address domestic extremism. And her presentation, and she'll be presenting at our conference in Atlanta, was just stunning. It was terrifying, but she spoke with these impeccable credentials and also out of her evangelical faith.
Yeah.
And so it was a really beautiful, compelling presentation, I think, for clergy who are often surrounded by parishioners who are getting their sense of reality from Fox News. And they need to have peers and colleagues around them that can affirm like their reality and can affirm like reality itself, right? I think we all need that sometimes at this moment, because we talk to friends and relatives and we're like, well, what reality are you drinking from? Like, what planet are you on?
Right.
And it's so frustrating. It's hard to kind of function in that environment and find our footing. And so we started with that kind of grounding. And I learned, so much from her and from the clergy there who, in my view, were really brave because they are really sticking their neck out in very, very difficult situations. And so I was in awe of their courage and thought, we've got to have this here in Georgia, in my home state.
I love it. Well, I'm excited about hearing everything that comes from it. So I've got two final questions for you before we move on to our more to tell question. One of them is out of a deep fear. And I think there are going to be a lot of pastors and ministers sitting in the audience in a few weeks in Georgia who may have some of these similar fears. And then the follow-up question is about asking if there is hope for the future. So here's the first question. We have had guests on this show, such as Brad Onishi, Jeff Charlotte, talking about the possibility of a coming civil war and the rise of political violence in the United States of America. We have seen with our own eyes what has happened in Charlottesville, Virginia, at the Capitol during the insurrection. We've seen political violence in Ferguson and other places. We saw just the last few weeks a march happen in Nashville, Tennessee, a bunch of right-wing extremists, white supremacists. There are a lot of people out there that are just frightened, to be honest with you, that the next couple of months leading to the election, if things do not go the way of one party, that political violence will be unleashed like we've never seen since the Civil War. Do you two have that concern? And Napp, I'm going to go with you first.
You should be concerned about the possibility of political violence. There's a very strong likelihood. That doesn't mean it'll happen, but we have fire extinguishers in our house, not because we want there to be a fire, but just in case that happens, right? So in the same way, we need to start thinking about and preparing for the possibility of political violence. Churches should have plans in place. If it happens in their town, there should be plans in place, or there should be discussions already taking place about what to do if something were to happen in their town. And definitely you should have extra security if you're a synagogue or a Black church. I mean, this is all like realistically, you need to take a look at this stuff. But we can always hope and prepare and do our best to try to avoid it. But we all need to be aware of the tremendous likelihood that something like that is going to happen.
Yeah. Jennifer, do you concur with that?
I do concur. And what gives me hope is when we can come together across divides and fight for the strength of our democracy and to recover it. And when we can unite to do that, it gives me courage to stand up.
Mhm.
It gives me hope that this country can come back together and can resist the extremes.
I'm gonna say, are you hearing on the ground more conservative voices talking about the survival of democracy and denouncing this rise of extremism on the right, which really sounds like and feels like fascism? I get hope from the voices like Adam Kinzinger, as well as Mitt Romney. Also thinking of Liz Cheney, who speaks
Yeah.
out against it, Russell Moore in the religious conservative circles. There seems to be more and more people who are willing to speak up from a conservative voice, denouncing what is going on in this country. Are you feeling that, or getting a sense that there are more conservatives calling this out?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about the work of people like Russell Moore, who've really put themselves on the line. Like, it's one thing when you stand up and say something bold in a crowd that agrees with you and everybody cheers and you get a standing ovation, yay, that feels really good. But when you go against the grain of your own community, it takes a lot
Mhm.
of courage. So, I see him, I see David French, and is it Nancy French,
Yeah.
Napp? I'm trying to remember her first name, who has a book out. I see clergy, like I said, in Arizona, coming together and sticking their necks out. We see people signing up here in Georgia. That is super exciting to me. That shows incredible courage. And I have started to work globally. And so I'm comparing a lot of what's happening here to what's happened in other countries and what's happening. And what studies show is when the center holds, factionalization and civil war cannot happen.
Mm.
What bad actors want to do is they want to carve out the center. They want to force people to choose sides and take up arms. So if we can hold the center and reach across the aisle as far and wide, even in this climate, do not let them convince us that we cannot cross aisles and that we cannot team up together. We do not have to agree on everything. We will eventually come back to fighting again. I'm sure Nap and I will have lots of debates when we get our democracy back together again. And that will be wonderful. Then we can start talking about policy again. We
Yeah.
can start debating reality, actual real solutions to problems. And I look forward to that day. But
Yeah.
right now, we need to really keep building bridges and never assume that somebody won't be with us when it comes to basic things like not doing physical violence against your neighbor because you disagree with them,
Yeah.
demonize people.
Yeah.
We need to, those are just very basic things that are fundamental to our being able to live together and create a strong democracy that works for everybody.
The conference is Politics, Polarization, and Peacemaking. It's in Atlanta, Georgia on July the 25th. So, Nap, how can they find out more about the conference? And more importantly, how can they sign up?
Yeah, it's great. Go to AmericanValues.org and just click on events, and you can get a ticket there. And yeah, come on out. We'd love to have you.
Will there be a virtual option as well?
It would not be a virtual option, but we will record the speeches, the talks,
Okay.
the main stage talks. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay.
So, if you're in Atlanta or around Atlanta, make certain to buy your ticket and attend this conference.
Or
because
can
it's gonna
hop
be
on a
great.
flight. Let's be honest. Atlanta's
Yeah, we
easy
can-
to get
it's
to.
easy
I
in
mean,
and out,
everybody
yeah.
loves the Atlanta airport.
Everybody loves
wouldn't wanna
Hartsville.
fly there?
Everybody. Well, Nap, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us on Good Faith Weekly this week. But before we let you go, we ask all of our guests one final question, and Missy has the privilege of asking it.
So, Jennifer and Napp, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, in light of our conversation today and the work that you do, what is your more to tell? And Jennifer, we'll start with you.
Well, I have founded a new organization called Faith and Democracy, and I'm working from the state of Georgia to the Republic of Georgia. Democracy everywhere is being threatened, and very often by the rise of religious nationalism. And so I'm designing solutions and working with partners around the globe to address that. So you can find us at faithdemocracy.org.
Excellent.
All right, Napp, what is your more to tell?
Sure. I'd love to introduce all your listeners to an additional resource we've created for small groups. It's called Mending Division Academy. You can get it at mendingdivisionacademy.com, or there's a link on our website at americanvalues.org. And this is a set of courses that small groups can go through that is looking at political polarization through several different lenses, media consumption, conspiracy theories, and a whole bunch of other ways that we're looking at it. And I think if your church small groups go through these courses, it will make a tremendous impact on your church with regard to their ability to deal with polarization, not only in their church, but in their community and families more broadly.
Excellent.
Awesome. Well, Napp, Jennifer, thank you again. It's been a pleasure visiting with you. Keep fighting the good fight, and hopefully in the next few months, we can all learn to talk civilly together and to continue to fight for this democracy, because it's the only one we have, so we might as well fight for it.
Yeah, and it was hard fought, hard won.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. Missy and I just finished up our conversation with Jennifer Butler and Napp Nazworth about the upcoming conference, Politics, Polarization, and Peacemaking, that'll be coming to Atlanta, Georgia on July 25th. Well, Missy, I really enjoyed our conversation with Jennifer, and Napp gave us a lot to think about. What stood out to you?
Well, I think the first thing, two things in particular. The first is just the importance of the clergy voice that still is vital in our society, and the immense pressure that they're under each and every week as they step behind the pulpit and trying to help their congregation kind of parse out and look at what's happening in the world, get along with one another,
Right. Sure, yeah.
interpret, and move forward in their in their faith and in their life, in their neighborhoods, and as citizens of this country.
Mm-hmm.
But the other was just the reminder that I know to be true, but I never tire of hearing it, because I think it's a good reminder. I think Napp mentioned in the beginning of the interview is that you can be political without it being partisan, that they're two different things, essentially, that we all absolutely need to be politically active. We all need to be political and involved in what's going on in our country, in our communities, and really the globe.
Yeah.
That's different from partisanship.
Yeah, sure.
And so I think that's just a good reminder, especially coming from the tradition that you and I come from, which, we are people who come from the Christian tradition, but take it a step further than that, the Baptist tradition, which is so staunchly rooted in separation of church and state. And so sometimes I think that gets muddled a little bit for us historically, but we do need to be politically active, engaged, informed within what's going on in our country.
Absolutely. Those are two extremely important points that you just made. So let me address the first. The fact that I want clergy to know, and I think this is what Jennifer and Napp are trying to do with this conference, to remind clergy that, first of all, they're not alone, that there are thousands of clergy across the country who find themselves in a very difficult position. But secondly, not only are they in a difficult position, but they're in a position where they can actually make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And there is an incredible history of clergy making a difference and bending that arc of the moral universe towards justice. And I begin with one of my heroes prior to the Revolutionary War, and that is Anglican pastor turned Baptist
Roger Williams.
Absolutely, Roger Williams.
Who founded the first city?
The first city who practiced religious liberty.
Practiced true religious liberty, which is,
Providence,
for the audience, I was going to give the audience a chance to answer, but go ahead.
Sorry, Providence, Rhode Island. Yes. Roger Williams, the famous quote that he had was that he left the shores of one persecution to arrive at the shores of another. And he spent the rest of his life and career fighting for religious liberty and the separation of church and state in a colonial system. and it cost him a great deal, but he went behind a pulpit each and every time he had an opportunity to preach that message. And then later on, individuals like Obadiah Holmes and Isaac Backus in Massachusetts and John Leland down in Virginia picked up that message, stepped behind pulpits each and every week, told their congregation that yes, religious liberty, church-state separation matters, and freedom of conscience matters. And they stood behind those pulpits and made a difference. I think of Anna Hutchinson and Mary Dyer back in that period of time as well. And then later on, I think of Harriet Beecher Stowe. I think of Harriet Tubman. I think of Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, who beat the drum of equality and justice for all people. And their message was finally heard. They had to keep pounding that drum, but they kept at it each and every week, making a difference. And then later on, I think of Martin Luther King Jr., I think of Fred Shuttlesworth, I think of Andrew Young, I think of all of those great civil rights leaders, John Lewis, oh my goodness, how could I forget him, about stepping behind pulpits, stepping into communities and preaching a gospel of inclusivity and equality for all of God's children. They made a difference. So when I hear about Jennifer and Napp convening a conference of clergy to encourage them to preach a message and to be reminded that they are part of a long legacy. Yes, 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 they are part of a great legacy that is making a difference, not only for democracy in this country and equality for all people, but for the gospel at large. And so that is inspiring to me when I hear about that being one of the goals. At least that's the way I took it in our conversation with Jennifer and Napp. And then your second point is just as important, and that is a reminder that the gospel itself is political by its nature. I mean, I have said this time and time again, Missy. You've heard it. You've heard me say it behind a pulpit. You've read the words that I have written, that Jesus was executed by the state.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get executed by the state by simply saying, hey, go love one another.
Mm-hmm.
You get executed by the state for saying things like, all people are equal,
Mm-hmm.
and all people deserve justice. And that, you know what, Emperor? You are not the ruler of the world. That is treason. The gospel itself is political. And Jesus was executed by the state because he was political. Now, Jesus was not partisan, but Jesus stood up for those who could not stand up for themselves. He stood up for the marginalized and the ostracized. And I'll never forget when I read a book long ago by a guest on this show, Jim Wallace, when he made the comment in one of his books that his faith, while it was private, should always be public. And what he meant by that, it should be political. Our faith should be political. And when you read the gospel, when you read Paul, when Paul says time and time again that Jesus is Lord, we don't realize that or recognize that as a political statement. Mm-hmm. But when Paul wrote it, it was very much a political statement. For when he said Jesus was Lord, it was contradictory to the very coinage of the Roman Empire, which read,
Caesar
is Lord. And so he was combating empire. And for me, that is at the heart of what we need to be about as Christians. Yes, we need to be about helping people find their spiritual selves. But in finding their spiritual selves, we also need to be about making certain that justice is alive and well in this world. And the only way to do that is to be political by nature. We should never be partisan, but there are times where we must be political and stand up for justice.
Well, help me parse this out a little bit, because being an example of being political would be about how our country, the organization of our government is going to take care of its citizens.
Right.
And what does that look like? Are we going to provide education? Are we going to provide roads? Are we going to provide clean water? Are we going to provide environmental protections? All of those things happen within the realm of a government structure.
Mm-hmm.
Our faith informs how we see that through.
Right.
Yes, am I
Yeah, absolutely. No,
explaining
that I
correctly?
mean that is exactly the way this is designed. And that is why it's so important that democracy not only survives, but it thrives, because my faith informs me to live out my morals and values, but in a way that is inclusive of all people, whether they are people of other faiths or people of no faith. My faith guides me simply to follow the words of Jesus, and that is to love my God and to love others as I would love myself. That is the mandate given to me, and that is a guiding principle for me. So that means everybody is free, everybody is equal, and everybody deserves justice.
I agree. I think it's just a great reminder of how we need to live out our lives, how we need to be active both in our faith community and in our political community, that we have a responsibility to our fellow citizens, and it is on us to be active and involved and engaged.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. I mean, it is very true. We all have a responsibility to uphold what it means to be not only a citizen of this country, but as people of faith, to follow our conscience and to make certain that everybody is loved and accepted in this world of ours. And so I think that is at the heart of everybody's faith, or at least I hope that is at the heart of everybody's faith. So if you're in Atlanta or around Georgia, make certain to sign up for this conference and attend it. Politics, Polarization, and Peacemaking. And I know it's not going to be streamed live, but we have been told by both Jennifer and Napp that it will be recorded and played at a later date. So even if it's after the fact, make certain you check it out. So Missy and I will be back next week, hopefully without any head injuries.
I'm hoping so.
At least the bleeding will stop by then.
I'm hoping that is the case.
Well, until next week, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.